Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian and anti-Nazi resistor, offered a startling analysis of human stupidity, one that goes far beyond a mere intellectual failing or momentary lapse. To Bonhoeffer, stupidity represents not just a personal flaw, but a potent and destructive social phenomenon, one that poses a greater threat than outright evil. He maintains that stupidity embodies a willful defiance of critical thought, a deliberate refusal to examine one's actions, beliefs, or their ramifications. Whereas evil actions can be checked by reasoned argument and moral appeal, stupidity remains impervious to such efforts. Bonhoeffer draws an essential line between ignorance and stupidity. Ignorance, he suggests, arises from a lack of information, but stupidity signals a deeper, entrenched state, a stubborn unwillingness or incapacity to entertain new ideas, facts, or perspectives. The stupid do not merely suffer from gaps in knowledge. They willfully deny opportunities to learn or reconsider their views. They hold fast to unexamined convictions and dismiss any intellectual challenge that might compel them to face uncomfortable realities. Consequently, stupidity is far more than absent thought. It is an outright refusal to engage in critical reflection, making it a dangerous self-reinforcing force. In this framework, stupidity proves far more perilous than ignorance, for it seals off any avenue to growth or comprehension. Bonhoeffer saw its most horrific manifestation under authoritarian rule, in particular the Nazi era, where he observed ordinary people's unthinking acquiescence become essential to the regime's triumph. Their unwillingness to question edicts or examine moral implications paved the way for unspeakable crimes. It was not overt cruelty, but a pervasive indifference, stupidity born of complacency, that enabled citizens to swallow the regime's simplistic, lethal propaganda without protest. Bonhoeffer also explores how authority itself breeds stupidity. Once individuals attain power, they often grow less disposed to scrutinize their own beliefs. Power structures exacerbate this tendency by rewarding agreement and sidelining dissent. Leaders cultivate entourages and institutions that echo their preconceptions, forging a self-reinforcing cycle of thoughtlessness. Consequently, those at the top become increasingly oblivious to alternatives and more inclined to obey hierarchical dictates without question. In this light, stupidity fosters a climate where choices stem from irrational impulses or sheer ineptitude rather than reasoned consideration. It becomes a powerful enabler of oppression and injustice, not through outright cruelty, but through a failure to grapple with nuance, to scrutinize one's own conduct, or to challenge entrenched norms. Bonhoeffer's paradox reveals a stark reality. The genuinely perilous figures are often not the willfully evil, but the thoughtlessly compliant, especially when they wield authority. Their blind deference, refusal to question, and aversion to intellectual growth make them particularly effective instruments of societal and political ruin in an age that increasingly scorns critical reflection. Bonhoeffer's warning underscores the corrosive potential of collective thoughtlessness and its far-reaching damage. Hannah Arendt, the German-American political theorist, built on Bonhoeffer's notion of stupidity by articulating the banality of evil. She argued that modern atrocities arise less from monstrous villains than from ordinary individuals who carry out heinous deeds without pausing to consider their moral weight. In her study of Adolf Eichmann at the Nuremberg trials, Arendt shifted the focus from innate malice to the frightening ease with which unthinking obedience can transform commonplace people into perpetrators of evil. Arendt maintained that Eichmann, one of the principal organizers of the Holocaust, was not driven by malevolence. Rather, he was a mundane bureaucrat, devoid of moral introspection, mechanically executing orders without any regard for the human suffering they caused. His banal behavior does not absolve him of culpability. On the contrary, it demonstrates that in the modern era, evil can flourish not only through fanatics or psychopaths, but also through ordinary individuals who fail to apply critical thought to their participation in vast systems. Eichmann's attitude illustrates a form of unreflective obedience rooted in stupidity rather than spite. He did not set out to do harm. He simply complied with authority without questioning the morality of his duties. His unwillingness to examine the consequences of his actions reveals the profound moral and intellectual numbness that accompanies a refusal to think critically. This very passivity enabled him to rise to a pivotal role within one of history's most monstrous regimes. In this context, the banality of stupidity extends far beyond Eichmann alone. Arendt contends that contemporary societies are especially prone to such mindlessness under the immense weight of conformity and deference to authority. Totalitarian systems, above all, exploit this psychological inertia, relying on the public's reluctance or incapacity for independent reasoning to lay the groundwork for relentless propaganda and control. By monopolizing information and distilling multifaceted issues into stark, black and white talking points, these regimes foster a citizenry that accepts their dictates unquestioningly. In doing so, ordinary people become unwitting tools of tyranny, not out of hatred, but because their intellectual passivity and lack of critical scrutiny render them pliable. Arendt's analysis reveals how institutionalized stupidity, manifested as blind obedience and uncritical acceptance, sustains oppressive power structures. Refusal to challenge state authority, abdication of moral responsibility, and blindness to the wider repercussions of one's deeds are the signature traits of the mindset that enables despotism. Arendt's warning is also a rallying cry: to push back against the forces of conformity, to guard against mental complacency, and to continually question the power systems that govern our lives. It reminds us that evil often takes root when reflection is absent, and our moral compass depends on the willingness to scrutinize both the world and our role within it. Today, this banality of stupidity appears whenever people passively accept repressive ideas or policies, whether at work, in politics, or amid social injustices. All too often, individuals follow directives or embrace oversimplified beliefs without grasping their wider impact. This kind of mental indolence, frequently cloaked in the guise of loyalty or patriotism, poses one of the greatest risks to democratic principles and human rights. The imperative, then, is to rouse people from this intellectual torpor, to foster autonomy of thought, and to demand that those in power submit to rigorous ethical and critical examination. Arendt's insight into the banality of stupidity warns us that ordinary citizens, when surrendered to conformity and thoughtlessness, can become unwitting instruments of profound damage. The pressing question becomes, how do we resist this drift toward complacency, both individually and collectively? The solution, Bonhoeffer and Arendt would agree, is to foster habits of critical analysis, deep self-examination, and the bravery to challenge both authority and peer pressure. Only by doing so can we disrupt the vicious cycle of unthinking compliance and strive for a society grounded in reason and fairness. Bertrand Russell, one of the foremost philosophers of the 20th century, shared similar concerns about his era's intellectual climate, particularly the growing tendency to exalt ignorance while marginalizing insight. He maintained that, in politics and society alike, folly often outpaces wisdom, and this imbalance profoundly influences historical outcomes. Russell's critique dovetails with Bonhoeffer's and Arendt's warnings about the perils of collective stupidity. Yet he goes further by highlighting how social institutions not only tolerate, but actively cultivate the ascendancy of ignorance over understanding. Russell insisted that today's political and social institutions frequently reward willful ignorance while punishing those who think for themselves and engage in careful reasoning. In an era when complex challenges are boiled down to catchy slogans and sound bites, people are steered toward simplistic fixes that never tackle the real issues. He warned that this dynamic gives an edge to politicians who peddle easy-to-swallow narratives over those who offer measured, in-depth assessments. The upshot is a culture where intelligence feels like a burden, and shallow platitudes are celebrated as virtues. Such an atmosphere primes society to favor folly over insight, as many gravitate toward stories that promise clarity and certainty, rather than confronting life's messy realities. Russell also observed how there's a certain psychological solace in embracing ignorance, even when it's destructive, because it spares us the discomfort of wrestling with complexity. Many prefer neat black and white stories that offer straightforward solutions to intricate dilemmas. By contrast, genuine critical thinking can feel daunting. It demands that we tolerate ambiguity, uncertainty, and contradiction, which few willingly embrace. The seductive appeal of simple answers, especially when amplified by media outlets and political figures, is extraordinarily powerful. Russell recognized that while true intelligence requires effort and deep self-examination, stupidity seduces us with an illusion of certainty. This inclination toward the comforting ease of ignorance, rather than the rigors of thoughtful analysis, helps explain why falsehoods often outshine facts in contemporary society. In the 21st century, the proliferation of mass and social media only magnifies this effect, creating an environment where misleading information and oversimplified messages dominate. In today's digital era, the swift circulation of ideas on social media platforms has fostered echo chambers that filter out any viewpoints contrary to our own. These ideological bubbles replace genuine critical inquiry with groupthink, as the relentless barrage of bite-sized messages and misinformation makes it ever harder to wrestle with nuanced topics. The mental complacency these networks encourage doesn't just allow ignorance to persist, it actively cultivates it. Russell's warnings from philosophy and politics feel eerily prescient here. Our online world has only magnified the very forces he described. He also highlighted a troubling irony in many political systems, that clear-headed, rational citizens are often deemed threats. Authoritarian regimes, in particular, thrive on a docile populace that won't question directives or disturb the established order. Russell cautioned that thoughtful, intelligent individuals inevitably clash with such dominant ideologies, and as a result, they risk being sidelined or even oppressed. This dynamic fosters a vicious circle in which thoughtful insight is not only undervalued, but deliberately quashed, leaving room for folly to flourish. Echoing Bonhoeffer's link between stupidity and the rise of authoritarianism, Russell underscores how intellectual complacency undergirds and perpetuates oppressive regimes. The ascendancy of ignorance over critical thought isn't a neutral drift. It is actively engineered by political, social, and media institutions that reward conformity and silence dissent. The repercussions are profound. A culture that exalts superficial simplicity over careful reasoning is prone to embrace dangerous dogmas, overlook urgent problems, and empower leaders who manipulate public naivete for their own ends. Russell's critique challenges us to examine whether we, too, are fostering a preference for ease and certainty at the expense of rigorous thought. By recommitting to education, nurturing curiosity, and defending the habits of critical analysis, we can begin to reverse the perilous trend he so vividly described and build a society where intelligence, rather than ignorance, is the prized virtue. Stupidity often acts less like a private shortcoming and more like a social contagion. Irrational ideas can sweep through communities, growing stronger simply through repetition and the approval of others. This epidemic of thoughtlessness is especially perilous because it weakens collective independence and critical reflection. The widespread adoption of baseless beliefs and oversimplified notions isn't random. It springs from intricate psychological and social forces that valorize conformity, punish dissent, and cultivate environments where mindlessness flourishes. From orchestrated propaganda to subtle peer pressure, the structures that enable stupidity are deeply embedded in our societal fabric. Furthermore, the lightning-fast spread of unsubstantiated claims is supercharged by both mass media and social media, which amplify and accelerate ideas regardless of their grounding in evidence or reason. Today, information moves faster than ever, yet much of it lacks reliability or depth. Misinformation, such as fake news and reductive storylines, spreads rapidly, often simply because it's endlessly repeated. That repetition bestows a veneer of credibility, prompting people to accept falsehoods. With anyone able to publish content, fact and fiction increasingly merge, making it tough for individuals to separate truth from lies. Faced with an overwhelming torrent of data vying for their attention, people are more likely to cling to the simplest, most familiar explanations rather than wrestle with the nuances of complex issues. One of the gravest dangers in this social spread of stupidity lies in how peer groups and collective pressure cement ignorance. As inherently social beings, our drive for acceptance and belonging often outweighs the impulse to think for ourselves. Whether political, religious, or ideological in nature, these groups establish norms that valorize certain convictions while quietly suppressing any hint of skepticism or critical examination. This phenomenon intensifies in polarized contexts where group identity demands ideological purity. Under such conditions, individuals abandon independent thought out of fear of ostracism or exclusion. The compulsion to conform and the craving for social approval become so overwhelming that people adopt the group's beliefs and behaviors unthinkingly. Gradually, this shared mindset gives rise to broad acceptance of simplistic, unreflective perspectives that bear little relation to reality. Another significant catalyst in the social spread of stupidity is the sway that authority and hierarchical structures hold over our beliefs. From an early age, we're trained to accept the word of teachers, parents, and political figures without challenge, and many cultures laud obedience while discouraging critical inquiry in favor of uniformity. This deference to authority is most overt in totalitarian states, where dissent is ruthlessly punished and information tightly controlled. But it also persists in democratic societies. Even when experts or leaders address complex subjects, a great many simply defer to their judgments, rarely inspecting the logic or evidence that underpins those declarations. Deference to authority poses a major obstacle to independent reasoning, fostering a climate in which individuals cease to think autonomously and instead depend on others to dictate what they accept as truth. The real peril of this social contagion of stupidity is not merely the proliferation of unfounded beliefs, but its capacity to choke off intellectual diversity and meaningful debate. When a group uniformly embraces uncritically held assumptions, it becomes exceedingly difficult to question those premises or entertain alternative viewpoints. Such intellectual uniformity breeds groupthink, as members prioritize unanimity and social cohesion over critical inquiry and creative exploration. The end result is a societal stasis. Ideas grow stale, conversations lose depth, and genuine progress stalls. In this kind of setting, mental laziness is widespread, and individuals who choose to engage in critical thinking or challenge conventional beliefs are frequently shunned or sidelined. To avoid being swept up in the collective ignorance, one must actively strive against fitting in and nurture a sense of independent thought. A key approach to achieving this is fostering an attitude that prioritizes inquiry, curiosity, and doubt, instead of taking concepts at their surface meaning. Individuals need to learn to question the information they come across and to probe deeply into its origins, reasoning, and supporting facts. This demands the readiness to leave one's social comfort zone and to confront ideas that may conflict with personal beliefs. It also necessitates the bravery to stand alone and to withstand societal pressures. Additionally, cultivating critical thinking should be regarded as an ongoing process, involving continuous learning, self-examination, and receptiveness to fresh viewpoints in a world where the spread of foolishness can occur rapidly. These cognitive skills are vital for maintaining one's capacity for independent thought and for fostering a more reflective and discerning community. In the end, the social spread of foolishness is not an unbeatable challenge, but it does require proactive opposition. By promoting critical thinking, valuing diverse ideas, and questioning those in power, people can liberate themselves from the collective mindset that sustains ignorance. The proliferation of irrational thought and conformity can be challenged through education, open discussions, and a dedication to independent reasoning. In this way, we can regain the strength of rational thought and ensure that intellect and contemplation guide our shared future, despite the prevalence of ignorance, manipulation, and a lack of critical thinking. Breaking free from the cycle of foolishness isn't merely an individual task, it's a necessity for society. History shows, especially through the works of thinkers like Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell, that a widespread acceptance of ignorance can result in disastrous outcomes. Just as these challenges stem from social dynamics, the methods to counteract them are also rooted in society. In this concluding section, we will examine how the lessons from these philosophers can aid us in avoiding the pitfalls of ignorance. The answer lies in fostering independent thinking, maintaining a dedication to critical analysis, and creating a community that appreciates intellectual depth rather than simplistic beliefs. To start with, Bonhoeffer's concept of ignorance highlights the necessity of ongoing intellectual involvement to avoid falling into foolishness. We must dedicate ourselves to learning throughout life and seeking truth, even when it feels uncomfortable. Bonhoeffer's criticism of complacency is particularly pertinent in today's world, where the urge to fit in and the lure of simple solutions are ever increasing. The best way to withstand these pressures is to consistently push ourselves to think critically about our surroundings. This requires not only searching for new knowledge, but also critically examining our current beliefs and assumptions. Genuine intellectual development demands humility and an acknowledgement that we may be mistaken. In a time when many tend to seek information that confirms their existing viewpoints, having the bravery to accept complexity and consider differing opinions is essential now more than ever. Arendt's concept of the ordinary nature of evil teaches another vital lesson for breaking free from the cycle of ignorance: the necessity for moral and intellectual contemplation. She showed that one of the significant threats in contemporary society is the tendency of regular individuals to relinquish their moral duties and intellectual freedom when confronted with authority. To escape this pattern, we need to reject blind compliance and accept our responsibility as engaged moral actors in the world. This entails building the ability to question authority, to confront difficult concepts, and to own our choices. As Arendt pointed out, thoughtlessness is not solely an individual flaw. It is a societal issue as well. Consequently, we must view it as our shared responsibility to oppose thoughtlessness and create environments where independent, critical thinking can thrive. Bertrand Russell's analysis of the prevalence of foolishness over intellect urges us to identify the systems and frameworks that actively foster ignorance in many modern societies, where intelligence is often undervalued and foolishness is often rewarded, particularly in politics. To shield ourselves from the effects of ignorance, we need to understand the intellectual influences that define our surroundings and remain alert to the media, ideological beliefs, and societal frameworks that maintain oversimplified and reductive viewpoints. Russell argued that society frequently favors conformity and penalizes dissent, particularly regarding intricate and tough questions. In order to break free from the cycle of ignorance, we must nurture the bravery to challenge dominant stories and resist those forces that attempt to condense complex matters into catchy phrases and taglines. Taking a critical approach to the world instead of passively accepting whatever is shown to us is the initial step towards intellectual independence. The media, especially social media, acts as a major contributor to the spread of ignorance in today's society, where ideas are often oversimplified, misrepresented, and quickly shared. Social media algorithms, created to boost engagement, typically favor emotionally provocative and sensational content over more nuanced and reflective discussions. This fosters an atmosphere where ignorance flourishes, leaving critical thought neglected. To guard against this, we must become more selective about the information we consume. This involves building media literacy capabilities and learning to identify bias, misinformation, and propaganda by scrutinizing the origins of our information. By doing so, we can start to escape the impact of the social media echo chamber and look for more trustworthy and comprehensive viewpoints. Another approach to countering the impact of foolishness is to surround ourselves with individuals who challenge our perspectives and promote intellectual development. Although social pressure is a strong force, we are significantly shaped by those in our circles. By forming connections with people who appreciate critical thinking, varied viewpoints, and honesty in thought, we can counterbalance the societal tendencies that urge us to conform. These connections can offer the intellectual support needed to resist the lure of consensus-driven thinking and to create a space where innovative ideas can thrive. Therefore, it is crucial to prioritize interactions with those who stimulate reflection, discussion, and a quest for knowledge. Moreover, nurturing a mindset of intellectual modesty is vital for breaking free from cycles of ignorance. Intellectual humility allows us to acknowledge the limitations of our knowledge and recognize that there is always more to learn. It liberates us from the pride often associated with certainty and encourages engagement with the world in a more open and curious way. In a culture where many feel compelled to exude confidence in their beliefs, being intellectually humble is both rare and immensely valuable. By fostering this humility, we can engage with the world more curiously, maintain a thirst for learning, and enhance our potential for personal growth. Ultimately, breaking free from the cycle of ignorance involves not only resisting outside influences, but also building inner strength. We must cultivate trust in our own critical thinking skills and strive to question the information we receive. This is particularly challenging in a world where false information and oversimplified views are widespread. However, it is achievable. By consistently pushing our boundaries, doubting authority figures, embracing humility in our thinking, and nurturing a community of independent minds, we can shield ourselves from the effects of ignorance and actively contribute to building a more thoughtful and reflective society. In summary, the thoughts of Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell provide a strong guide for breaking free from the cycle of ignorance. Although the forces that sustain ignorance are powerful, they can be overcome. By dedicating ourselves to lifelong education, ethical contemplation, intellectual bravery, and social accountability, we can protect ourselves from the ignorance. Against the widespread impact of ignorance, we must become the resistors, the thinkers, and the skeptics who work towards a better, more enlightened future. As this video reveals, ignorance has a significant and threatening influence in our society that can affect political systems. Nevertheless, by grasping the underlying mechanisms and embracing the insights of thinkers like Bonhoeffer, Arendt, and Russell, we can safeguard ourselves from becoming intellectually passive. Each of us must foster critical thinking, oppose the pull of conformity. If you found this conversation meaningful, be sure to click the like button and subscribe. Until next time, continue to question and keep evolving.